So getting started, pivoting data, I'm assuming that everyone is on Excel 2007 or 2010 these days. Now, there is Excel 2003. I do still bump into people that are using that product, and maybe you're still there, and that's fine. But it is about 9 years later. So I mean, we are getting to a point where hopefully people are converting over. A lot of the concepts today will still work in 2003. It's just a little bit different. So just bear that in mind if you are on Excel 2003. But what's nice about 2007 is you do have this insert pivot table button, and it's on the insert menu. So it's a little bit weird, like why, is it on the, you would normally think it's on the data menu because that's where it used to be in Excel 2003. But with the ribbon of Excel, they've moved everything around, and now it's on the insert menu. But if you insert to a pivot table, it basically does a pretty good job at finding all of the data and essentially then posting a pivot table. And in getting around the pivot, what I really like is, and this is in the new kind of Excel, is that they have this pivot table tools. And you'll see that in this next slide where essentially you have an ability to, at the top menu there, to do a lot of work. And I'm trying to show you actually both the options and the design. The options allows you to handle things like options, such as options in a pivot table, field settings, sorting, changing the data source, adding calculated fields in, I believe there, that might be the design actually. No, that is still in the options section where they have formulas there. Pivot charting, etc. So those are all of the things that you have. Even I, moving from Excel 2007 to 10, there are some subtle differences in the menu bar, and again, you'll actually probably see that even in this slide as relation to what we'll be showing in a little bit. But it's very slight and something where you can very quickly find. And one of the things that I really like actually in looking at all of this is being able to graph the data, which we'll show in just a couple of seconds. But one thing I'll note is that in a couple of things, you can change the field settings by selecting the field settings button, which is over on the left hand side here. It's at the top menu right under that sum of invoice amount, but there's a field settings where you can change things. But what I find there is you can do quite a bit with that, and you'll see that we're going to be doing that quite a bit today. But you can also right click any part of a pivot table data and also change the field settings. So that's something that we're going to do a lot, and I wanted to show that. And when you do that, the value field settings, you're able to kind of not only change things like sum or count or maybe the average or the max or the min very quickly. I mean, you can start to say what is the largest amount that a vendor posted in the accounts payable data? What is the smallest amount that a vendor posted in the accounts payable data? What's the average for that vendor? And just by selecting the word average, it calculates that. In the show values as you'll see, you'll be able to even make it more of a percentage base, which is really kind of neat. From a field settings, formatting the cells, which is that number format button, goes to another page. You can then do all of your formatting of data. Again, we're going to be doing all of this in a few minutes, but I just wanted to kind of show you it first in a slide format. Graphing the data. Again, by selecting pivot chart, one button click, and boom, you are automatically then into a pivot chart that is dynamic. So as you change the pivot table, you will also add or change that pivot chart, which is very, very useful. And one last thing is grouping data ranges or date ranges. What I find is that the grouping function is useful. I don't use it too much other than for dates, but I find for dates, as you'll see, to group things by quarter or by year or by month by just, again, right clicking a field and hitting the group button and then grouping by, again, by year, month, or day, or whatever, you're able to get a lot done very, very quickly in your analysis. So now that we're in Excel, I have a payables data file open here, and it's got a few extra things that we're going to work on later today, so just try to ignore some of this yellow stuff over here. Just in ignoring that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight only the data that I want. So it's that A through I 4822, select the insert button, and then the pivot table button on the left there. And it's pretty smart. It goes from actually D1, which is wrong. I want to make that A, so you can edit it here. Oops. Want to do from A1 to I4822. And at this point I wanted to also note, which we won't be doing today, you can, and this is where you get into larger data sets, you can use an external data source as well. And you can bring in data from, say, a comma-separated file that is 2 million records big. No problem, and that external data will allow you to do that. Then I'm going to go to a new worksheet down below here, hit the OK button, and we're at our pivot table format. So we're going to start dragging and dropping fields in, and what I usually do is I work more on, let me just try to move this up a little bit so you can see it. I work more in these bottom area down below here, and as opposed to bringing things over here. But let's just play around just kind of quickly here. I'm going to first bring in the invoice date, and I'm going to bring the invoice date into the row label area. So notice now all my rows are my dates, and they're sorted from chronologically. Excel does its best job at trying to figure that out. And then what we can do is bring in the enter column, and I'm going to bring that into the columns label. So notice now I have my columns up here that have the summary by person and by day. Then what I can do is I can bring in the invoice amount field into the value section. Whoops, just drag and drop that into here. And notice how things are a little bit unformatted, not the best, in formatting sense. So let me just kind of change that by going to my value field settings. I just click on that drop down button here, go to my value field settings, and click on number format. And in the number section, we'll change that to that type of format, a lot nicer to look at. And now I have a much nicer looking chart by day, by person. Okay, just continuing on here, what I'd like to show now is I can right click on this and I can select the group button. So that's just clicking on any date, right clicking, grouping. And right now it's day, month, year, but I can do it, let's say, by month, whoops, and year. So we just have month and year. And now we have more of a year and month type graph. So it has 2009 and all of the months, 2010, all of the months, and a little bit of 2011 in there. So pretty cool stuff. I've been able to kind of group things. Let me just now show you, just as we've created this simple kind of pivot table, let me go back up to this menu and show you, based on the menu, what we can do from the menu bar, because there's a lot up here that can apply that, again, you can do what I just did by working more within the pivot table and right clicking on things and doing that, but you can also just go up to this menu bar up above and do quite a bit as well. So in the menu bar, we have a few different options here. Starting over at the left hand side, we have the pivot table options. I'm not going to go through all of these because I just don't think it's worth it right now. Things like the totals, you might not want to show the grand total for the columns or the grand total for the rows in here. I'm going to leave them in, but you don't have to. One of the things that I like in my display format, we have the classic pivot table layout, which is the way I normally set things up. But normally 2010 has this deselected. Okay, so other things that you might want to consider, I don't use these very much, to be honest with you, as I look at these labels and format, might be how you should display numbers. So whether or not you want to display your data and from a printing point of view, you might want to set print titles or etc. So there's a few different options in there. I'm showing you this in more of this unclassic mode. Didn't really seem to change very much here, but there is kind of a classic mode and an unclassic mode as well. Okay, so other things that we can walk through is in the field settings option. Again, right now I'm in the years column, so obviously I can change the field settings here. In the invoice date, I can select field settings, again, make any changes there. In the amount section, field settings, and that's where we were just a second ago. And personally, I find it easier to work more on this right-hand side when I do my field settings, but again, you can select in the graph or in the pivot table and select that however you'd like. Another thing that you might want to do, just kind of going over to this grand total column and going to my pivot table tools, you could select the sort option, and you could maybe sort largest to smallest as well, and then that will sort it within that particular time range, so you can actually get this as opposed to being sorted in a monthly format. You could sort it from the biggest month to the smallest month, and maybe that's something that would be useful for you. If you want to go back in any way, and I'm even unsure of how to do this with the ribbon, to be honest, but I just select Control Z, and Control Z will kind of bring you back to whatever you'd like. And actually what I really like is this Control Z or undo. Here it is up on my top pivot table options here. You can really undo quite a bit. I mean, you can go back and undo my grouping that I did, the option change that I did, and it saves quite a bit of it. So if you make a lot of mistakes, you can go back and make a lot of changes to edit your data. Okay, again, we'll be going through more of these options, but I just wanted to kind of note you can refresh your data if you, within your data file here, if you make some edits, that can refresh by doing the refresh data here, and a few other things we're going to talk about later, like adding some fields, so let's talk about that a little bit later. From a design point of view, you can actually select styles that might look prettier to you or less pretty to you. I go with the standard one. It's just something I'm used to, but there's lots of different options here and much nicer ones down here, I guess, that you could select that can really pretty up the chart. I'll stick with this one for right now. Why not? Just to make it look a little prettier. But I find that from a design point of view, I don't spend a lot of time with this, but it's something that you might want to consider. Blank rows, you can remove those. But back in the options, one last thing I wanted to show you, just kind of on a the quick tour of pivot tables, is to select the pivot chart option. And the pivot chart option will automatically create a chart based on the data we had. And what I'm going to do is select a stacked column, and you'll see why in a second. And I'm just going to now right-click this object and say Move Chart to a new sheet, and we'll call this, we could call it Sheet 1 Chart. And now we have this new chart. Now, what's interesting is each column of data kind of shows up as a different bar in the particular data. What I like is the way Excel in the pivot table set up the data, where you have the month, the year, etc. Now, if I move this around a bit and I move the years underneath the dates like that, and then so now I have my months here and my years over here, you can go back to your pivot chart, and again, you can almost look at like January, 10 to 11, February 10 to 11. And again, this may even be a much better way of looking at things, that you might want to option into. Notice too, though, which is okay, I guess, is that it adds some of these total lines in there. I find them a bit annoying, so I will a lot of times right-click on the total line. So if you don't want a total line, you right-click and just say get rid of that subtotal, and it will remove it. Now, it doesn't really affect the chart, which we have here, but again, very interesting way of very quickly being able to get different perspectives on your data. And this is from a time perspective, as you can see. Now, one of the things I said was, a great kind of audit finding I found. I'm going to drag out all these dates, right, and just get rid of everything and start over. Let's take that enter date and throw that into the mix, just for fun. And you know what? I guess I can keep the enter in there. I might as well. And let's click the select chart. Now, dynamically, that chart redid itself. And very quickly here, you can see, what are those days that I'm going over $100,000? And there's only a few, or below. And look at this one. I have a negative 374 that was posted by KD on December 8th, 2010. It is completely off the norm of anything else that anybody else is doing. And what's nice about these charts, bear with me, if I scroll in dramatically here, to 400%. That might be a little too dramatic. But it's still something where you can see quite a bit now in that data. So, you can get a sense of where people are posting things. And again, you're drilling down pretty heavily here. You have to kind of see, who's who. RL is blue, LB is purple, and KD is green. You see a lot of KDs in there and RLs and, etc. The KD is the green one, so that one, you kind of see a lot of that showing up in the data itself, not only in a large bar point of view, but a small bar point of view as well.